fascinating here, I think, is how all these different threads are interwoven. You've got diplomacy, military strikes, Iran's internal politics, regional alliances. They're all tangled together in this rapidly unfolding story.
Yeah, it's not just what's happening on the ground, is it?
No, exactly. It's why it's happening, the sort of strategic thinking behind each move, and, what it might signal for the future of the Middle East, and frankly, for global stability, too.
Absolutely. So our mission today is really to try and cut through some of that noise. We've sifted through a mountain of the latest intelligence, the analyses, really trying to consolidate the critical info from just the past 24 hours.
A huge amount to get through.
It is. The goal here is to give you the crucial nuggets, help you understand what's most important in this really complex, fast-changing landscape. Think of it as your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on this.
Precisely. We'll be looking at the diplomatic tightrope walk, the intensifying military actions from both sides, some really significant and frankly quite telling shifts inside Iran's leadership as well. And of course, the ripple effects across the whole region, especially with those Iranian-backed groups. It all helps us connect these individual pieces, these dots, to paint a much larger and, let's be honest, a more alarming picture.
So let's start our journey into this, maybe not on the battlefield itself, but in those quieter corridors of diplomacy.
Yeah.
Because Iran seems to be sending out some really intriguing, almost contradictory signals, doesn't it?
It really does. It's like watching, I don't know, a chess match where one player offers a handshake but is simultaneously reaching for a different, maybe more aggressive piece.
Yeah. So on one hand, Iranian officials have been indicating some willingness to negotiate an end to this conflict. We've seen reports that the U.S. Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, he's been in contact with Iran's Foreign Affairs Minister, Abbas Araqi.
Right, and apparently Witkoff received, quote, some indications of interest in resuming talks. That's a key phrase, some indications. Vague, but potentially significant.
And it's not just words, is it? There was that report on June 18th about 2 Iranian government planes landing in Oman.
Yes, and Oman, as many will know, has often played that role, hasn't it? A quiet but effective mediator between Tehran and Washington. A discreet back channel.
So while the purpose of those flights isn't clear,
it certainly hints at potential back-channel activity, doesn't it? A quiet effort, perhaps, to bridge what's become a very wide communication gap. And then you have Iraqi himself announcing a meeting in Geneva.
Right, scheduled for June 20th with the UK, France, Germany, the EU, specifically to discuss the nuclear issue and latest regional developments. That sounds like a very clear diplomatic front opening up.
It does. It signals they're willing to engage on that level, at least.
And France, too, has said it's ready to support negotiations. Their foreign minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, mentioned France is prepared to help, quote, scale back Iran's nuclear enrichment and ballistic missile programs.
Ah, but scale back. That's where the contradiction really bites, isn't it?
Exactly. Because despite this apparent interest in talks, Iran hasn't really seemed to soften its core positions. Scaling back for Iran seems to mean keeping some level of these programs.
Which is just fundamentally at odds with the U.S. demand, right? Zero uranium enrichment, total degradation of ballistic missiles. It's 2 very different definitions of scaling back.
So how do we square that circle, this willingness to talk versus the unwavering stance?
Well, it really highlights this fundamental, almost irreconcilable disagreement. It makes any real breakthrough incredibly difficult. It's like they're speaking different languages in the same room. And you see this reflected in the reporting, too. You might get an unspecified U.S. official cited by Axios hinting at a nuanced opening. A bit of hope. But then you get Arab intermediaries talking to Western media, and they paint a much more rigid picture of Iran's position.
Like what, specifically?
Well, for example, these intermediaries reported back on June 16th that Iranian officials are willing to de-escalate hostilities, which, sounds positive.
Okay.
But they're absolutely not prepared to make concessions on the nuclear talks, which implies that U.S. demand for zero enrichment on Iranian soil, still a complete non-starter for Tehran, a red line they just won't cross.
So it might be more tactical then. A way to ease pressure, maybe.
That's certainly a plausible reading. A tactical diplomatic move, maybe buying time rather than a genuine shift in their core policy. It's a huge obstacle, especially given the U.S. position.
And then, layered on top of this, you have the very public, very blunt rhetoric. President Trump's call for Iran's unconditional surrender on social media back on June 17th. How does that kind of language affect these, delicate back channel efforts?
Oh, it absolutely affects them, and mostly it undermines them. It just hardens positions on both sides. You saw Supreme Leader Khamenei's response, didn't you?
Yeah, that televised speech on the 18th, categorically rejecting it.
Exactly. Categorically rejected. And coming directly from the Supreme Leader, televised like that, that's hugely significant. It's not just for domestic consumption. It's a clear message, internally and externally, that demand is an absolute non-starter, an insult, even.
So it doesn't exactly pave the way for compromise.
Quite the opposite. Public pronouncements like that rarely do. They tend to entrench the existing positions, make the path to negotiation even rockier. It just reinforces that massive gap between their stances, makes those whispers of back-channel talks seem even more fragile.
So you've got this quiet buzz of potential talks, maybe in Oman, maybe Geneva. But then these loud public rejections and these deeply dug-in positions. It really makes you wonder about Iran's true motives here. Why signal interest in talks now?
It's the key question, isn't it?
Given the pressure they're under. Is it just a play for time? Maybe to advance their nuclear program further or shore up internal support? Or is there a genuine desire for a deal, but only, absolutely only, on their terms?
Well, all of those are possible, and it's probably a mix. Tehran's making a really complex calculation here. They're weighing the immense costs of this conflict, economic, human, against what they see as the unacceptable concessions needed for a diplomatic way out.
So buying time could mean advancing nuclear leverage.
Or just weathering the storm, dealing with internal dissent. If it is a genuine desire for a deal, it's likely one they feel they can negotiate from a position of relative strength, not weakness. They'd expect the U.S. to shift significantly.
And the pressure is very real, as you said, especially when you factor in the U.S. preparations for potential military strikes.
Exactly. That brings us to the other side of the coin, the looming military threat.
Right. Building on that pressure, let's pivot to that shadow hanging over everything, potential U.S. military action. We're seeing reports, pretty specific ones, that the U.S. is actively preparing to support a potential strike on the Fordo fuel enrichment plant if Iran rejects U.S. conditions for getting back to nuclear talks.
And this isn't just vague talk, is it? Unspecified U.S. officials, cited by Western media on June 19th, reported that President Trump has actually approved attack plans for Iran. Approved them.
But holding off on the final decision.
Holding off, yes, to see if a deal can be reached first. But having approved plans in hand, that's a very significant escalation of the threat level.
And there are conditions attached to any potential strike, reportedly.
Yes, and they're crucial. Trump apparently wants assurances that any strike is absolutely necessary, that it won't lead to a protracted war, and this is key, that it will succeed in destroying the Iranian nuclear program.
Those are incredibly high bars.
They are. It suggests a deep awareness within the administration of the massive risks involved. You don't set conditions like that lightly.
And we're seeing physical moves, too. U.S. assets being repositioned.
Yes, the U.S. has started moving military assets to the Middle East in recent days. Explicitly, they say, to provide more options for defending U.S. assets and interests. This isn't subtle. Visible asset movement like that is a clear signal of intent, a show of force.
And there's even a timeline being mentioned.
Apparently so. U.S. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated Trump will decide on whether to strike Iran within the next 2 weeks. That puts immense pressure on the diplomatic track, doesn't it? Turns possibilities into potentially imminent realities.
Definitely raises the temperature. Now, Fordo itself, that's a particularly tough target, isn't it? Can you explain why, for listeners maybe not familiar with the details?
It is uniquely challenging. Fordo is built deep inside a mountain. It's a hardened underground facility. That makes it incredibly difficult to destroy, even with advanced bunker buster bombs designed precisely for targets like this.
So its strategic importance is really its resilience.
Exactly. It's built to withstand attack. In fact, there was a report, an unspecified U.S. official told Axios, that Israeli officials had previously indicated to the Trump administration that Israel might even need to attack Fordo with humans.
Meaning ground troops, special forces.
That's the implication, yes, because Israeli air-launched munitions might simply not be powerful enough to destroy it from the air. That really highlights the unique, almost daunting challenge Fordo represents.
So targeting Fordo is a massive undertaking.
It is, and that's why it remains such a primary concern for anyone trying to neutralize Iran's nuclear capabilities. So when the U.S. starts moving assets into the region, it really does alter the dynamics. It's a powerful show of force, maybe a deterrent, or maybe a precursor to action.
So while this whole diplomatic chess game is playing out, with its bluffs and its quiet talks, and the U.S. is sort of holding its cards close.
Yeah.
The skies over Iran are telling a very different, much louder story. Israel hasn't been waiting. They've been relentlessly carrying out their own air campaign.
That's right. Highly active and seemingly escalating. And the sheer intensity, the deliberate precision of these strikes against key Iranian infrastructure, well, it speaks volumes about their immediate goals.
It really does seem systematic.
It does. The IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, have continued striking Iranian nuclear sites, military facilities, energy infrastructure, and if you look closely at the targets they're choosing, it reveals a very deliberate, very strategic approach. It suggests they have a deep understanding of Iran's capabilities and its vulnerabilities.
Let's start with the nuclear side, because that seems absolutely central. The Arak heavy water reactor in Markazi province was hit on June 19th. And the satellite images are pretty dramatic, aren't they?
They are. You can clearly see the dome of the reactor has collapsed. Nearby distillation towers, other infrastructure, also visibly damaged. It's a significant hit.
Now, Arak's importance is its potential for plutonium production, right?
Yeah, correct. It could produce plutonium as a byproduct, which is, of course, one pathway to a nuclear weapon. Now, this specific reactor was never fully operational, and Iran had actually agreed to redesign it under the 2015 nuclear deal to ease exactly these kinds of concerns.
So why hit it now if it wasn't operational and was meant to be redesigned?
Well, the IDF stated they struck it because of its potential to support plutonium-based weapons. It's interesting because Iran's more immediate focus has been on uranium enrichment. Hitting Arak suggests Israel is determined to block all potential paths to a bomb, even the ones not currently active.
Covering all bases, essentially.
Seems like it, and it's crucial to note, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, they confirmed the strike happened. But importantly, they also stated that no nuclear material was actually present at the facility.
Okay, so it was infrastructure damage, not a radiological risk.
Exactly, which is a critical distinction. Though an evacuation order was issued for the area around Arak, suggesting concern about the immediate conventional aftermath for locals, even without nuclear material involved.
So they're hitting potential future threats. But they're also hitting sites linked to Iran's past nuclear weapons efforts, aren't they? Like the Sanjarian site near Tehran.
Yes, and that's fascinating strategically. David Albright, the former UN weapons inspector, describes Sanjarian as completely destroyed. This site was absolutely key in Iran's old pre-2003 nuclear weapons program, the Ahmad project.
What was its role back then?
It was used for high explosive tests, the kind you need to perfect the trigger mechanism for a nuclear warhead. And there were reports from the Institute for Science and International Security indicating increased activity there in late 2024. Maybe signs of renewed interest.
So destroying it sends a very particular message.
A profound one. It's not just about current capabilities, it's a psychological blow. It basically says, we know your secrets, we know your history, we see everything, and we will stop you from ever reviving this, even from the ashes of past attempts.
It signals deep intelligence, doesn't it?
Unparalleled intelligence, yes. And an unwavering, long-term commitment to dismantling any piece of a weapons program, no matter how old or buried. It gives you a glimpse into maybe broader strategic objectives than just dealing with the immediate threats.
And Natanz keeps getting hit too. A storage facility there in Esfahan province was struck recently. The IDF claimed it held equipment for nuclear weapons development.
Yes, Natanz has been a frequent target. Previous strikes there hit the underground enrichment facilities directly. So you see the pattern. Yep. Israel is systematically
we do a little
going
trolling.
It's
called we do a little trolling.
Potential plutonium at Arak, historical weapons work at Sanjarian, enrichment infrastructure at Natanz.
So what's the big picture message here? Hitting such a diverse range of sites, some even linked to programs that were supposedly shelved years ago.
It's a comprehensive message, almost like a public declaration of intent, really. Israel's stated goal is to degrade, destroy, and remove the threat of the Iranian nuclear program. By hitting all these different types of sites, they're showing a deep, almost surgical understanding of Iran's entire nuclear architecture, present and past.
Leaving no stone unturned.
Exactly. Trying to ensure that any conceivable path to a weapon, plutonium, uranium, maybe reviving old research, is systematically blocked. It suggests a strategy to dismantle not just current capabilities, but also the latent potential, the institutional know-how.
Okay, moving beyond the nuclear focus, Israel's also hitting Iran's conventional military capabilities, right?
Yeah.
And potentially leadership. We saw strikes on those Gadir over-the-horizon radars?
Yes, at least 6 Gadir radars across Iran have been hit. One near Shiraz was struck sometime between June 13th and 19th. These are really important systems for Iran.
Why specifically? What do they do?
They're crucial for air defense. They can detect aircraft way out, up to 1,100 kilometers away. So a radar near Shiraz could potentially see aircraft deep into Iraq. Hitting them is a direct effort to degrade Iran's ability to track incoming Israeli aircraft. It's about maintaining Israeli air superiority over Iran.
Blinding their eyes, essentially.
Precisely.
Yep.
Creating a tactical advantage, allowing Israeli planes to operate more freely with less risk. It's a classic move in any air campaign. Control the skies.
And missile infrastructure is also under attack.
Heavily. The IDF has conducted at least 20 strikes targeting surface-to-surface missile infrastructure. That includes launchers, support vehicles, the things Iran needs to actually fire its missiles.
Which are their main way of striking back at Israel.
Exactly. Geolocated imagery from June 19th showed an IRGC Aerospace Force facility hit near its Tehran headquarters. That's the branch responsible for the drones and missiles. An IRGC base in Karaj, Al Bor's province, was also reportedly hit.
So the aim there is pretty clear.
Yeah, limit Iran's ability to retaliate, degrade their capacity to sustain this missile campaign, take away their punch.
Okay, now this next part, this feels like a really dramatic, maybe even startling escalation in Israel's stated aims. They're not just hitting military and nuclear targets anymore, they're hitting energy infrastructure and unbelievably openly talking about a decapitation campaign against Iran's supreme leader.
It is unprecedented, certainly in the public statements. It feels like crossing a major threshold in the conflict's rhetoric, and maybe its objectives, too.
Let's talk about the energy strikes first. A power plant in Karaj reportedly hit on June 19th.
Yes. And previous analyses have suggested that hitting critical energy infrastructure like this could significantly worsen Iran's already difficult energy situation. You could see widespread, frequent electricity shortages, outages.
And the thinking behind that is?
The strategic theory is that this kind of economic hardship, the disruption to daily life, could potentially trigger internal unrest, create pressure on the regime from within Iranian society, maybe forcing them to change course.
But the decapitation talk is something else entirely.
It really is. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz stated quite explicitly on June 19th that, and I'm quoting, preventing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's existence is now one of the objectives of the Israeli air campaign.
Preventing his existence, that's blunt.
Extremely. And it follows similar, equally audacious statements from Prime Minister Netanyahu since June 16th. Netanyahu even asserted that Khamenei's death would end the conflict.
Wow. And they've actually instructed the IDF to increase attacks on government targets.
Apparently so. Both Katz and Netanyahu instructed the IDF to increase the intensity of attacks on government targets, explicitly to eliminate threats and, quote, undermine the Ayatollah's regime.
What are the implications of such an overt strategy, targeting the head of state?
It moves far, far beyond just degrading military capabilities. This is explicit regime change language, targeting the supreme leader of a sovereign nation. The implications are just immense and incredibly risky.
How so?
Well, on one hand, it signals Israel views Khamenei as the absolute core of the threat, believing his removal could fundamentally change everything, maybe even lead to the regime's collapse.
Oh, the risks.
Enormous. It could provoke an even more extreme, unpredictable response from Iran and its proxies. They'd likely see it as an existential threat. Ironically, it might even unite Iranians against an external aggressor rather than fracturing society. It could completely backfire on the goal of creating internal unrest. It's a very, very high-stakes gamble.
And that leads us perfectly into looking at Iran's response. Because despite this intense Israeli air campaign, despite Israel claiming they've destroyed maybe half or even two-thirds of Iran's missile launchers, Iran has kept firing ballistic missiles at Israel.
They have. It shows remarkable resilience, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
As of June 19th, CTP-ISW, that's the Critical Threats Project and Institute for the Study of War Group, they'd recorded 43 impacts, either Iranian missiles hitting or Israeli interceptors engaging them.
And even with the IDF claiming significant success against launchers, Iran's ability to keep firing persists. What does that tell us?
Well, it suggests either their missile infrastructure is incredibly well dispersed, maybe lots of mobile launchers hidden sites, or they simply started with a massive arsenal that can absorb these hits and still keep going.
Or both, perhaps. And significantly, the size of the Iranian missile barrages actually went up on June 19th. One barrage had around 30 missiles. That's the largest we'd seen since June 16th.
And so they're not just continuing, they're escalating their response.
That's what it looks like. It shows they're not backing down, they're willing to take the hits and still hit back, maybe even harder.
And they're using more advanced missiles now, too. We saw the first use of a Casual missile on June 18th.
That's right, the Casual. It's a two-stage, solid-fueled, medium-range ballistic missile. Range is about 2,000 kilometers. Now, it was successfully intercepted, which is important.
But what's the significance of deploying a new type like that?
The key thing about the Casual is the solid fuel. Solid-fueled missiles are much quicker to prepare and launch compared to older liquid-fueled ones. That drastically cuts down the warning time for air defenses, makes interception harder, increases the threat.
And then there was the Khorramshahr 4 launch on the 19th with a cluster munition warhead.
Yes, and that represents a particularly dangerous, frankly, alarming escalation. That warhead released 20 small, 2.5 kilogram explosive submunitions at an altitude of about 7 kilometers.
Designed to spread the damage.
Exactly. The idea is to increase the impact area, boost potential casualties, maybe overwhelm air defenses by scattering targets. Now, in this case, apparently one submunition hit a home in Azor, thankfully, without causing injury, and the other 19 failed to detonate and were destroyed.
A testament to Israeli defenses, maybe, or luck?
Perhaps a bit of both, and maybe issues with the munition itself. But the intent behind using a cluster munition is clear. It's designed to inflict broader harm across a wider area. It's a nasty escalation.
And what were the actual impacts on the ground in Israel from these recent missile strikes?
Well, they hit several civilian locations. Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba was struck. It had been evacuated, thankfully, so no injuries there. Iran later claimed they were aiming for an intelligence HQ next door, but the hospital took the hit.
Anywhere else?
Yes, shops and apartments were damaged in Ramat Gan near Tel Aviv. Apartment buildings were hit in Holon, also near Tel Aviv. These are densely populated areas. The Israeli Health Ministry reported 220 minor injuries and 20 more serious ones from these latest attacks.
The casualties are starting to mount again.
Yes, these were the first injuries reported from Iranian strikes since June 15th. It underscores the escalating human cost and the danger of these barrages.
What about the drones? Iran's been launching a lot of those too. How are Israeli defenses coping with that threat?
Remarkably well, actually. The Israeli Air Force and Navy have shown a very high success rate. They've intercepted over 95% of the Iranian drones aimed at Israel.
Over 95%. That's impressive.
It really is. Out of roughly 1,000 drones launched since June 12th, something like 480 have been shot down. Only about 200 even made it into Israeli airspace. It shows Israel has a robust, layered air defense system that's proving highly effective against this particular type of threat.
So the drone threat, while persistent, seems largely managed.
Largely neutralized before causing significant damage, yes.
Now let's turn to the internal shifts inside Iran. These seem incredibly important, especially with Israel talking about decapitation and putting pressure on the regime.
Yeah.
We've seen some very rapid changes in key military commands.
Absolutely, and these appointments are highly telling, I think. On June 19th, Supreme Leader Khamenei appointed Brigadier General Mohammad Karami as the commander of the IRGC ground forces.
And Karami's background is significant.
Very significant. He has decades of experience, specifically in internal security and counterinsurgency. He played a key role in suppressing the big protests in November 2019, and then again during the Masa Amini protests that started in September 2022.
So he's known for cracking down on dissent.
Exactly. He's actually sanctioned by the US, EU, UK, and Canada for precisely that role. And his appointment comes after this incredibly fast turnover. Remember, the previous IRGC commander, Salami, was killed by the IDF on June 12th. He was replaced by Pakpour, who was then almost immediately replaced by this guy, Karami.
So is this just musical chairs because of the IDF strikes, or is there something more strategic about appointing Karami?
It seems like both. It's partly a direct response, needing to maintain command continuity after losing key figures. But appointing Karami, with his specific background in brutally putting down internal dissent, that might reflect some very real, maybe growing concerns within the leadership about potential unrest inside Iran.
Especially given the potential impact of those energy strikes we talked about earlier.
Precisely. If strikes worsen the energy crisis, leading to blackouts and hardship, that could fuel domestic discontent. Appointing a hardliner known for suppression suggests Khamenei might be prioritizing internal stability and control right now, perhaps even over external operations. It suggests the regime is, battening down the hatches at home.
And there was another key appointment, too, wasn't there, in IRGC intelligence?
Yes. The IRGC commander, Pakpour, appointed Brigadier General Majid Kademi as the chief of the IRGC intelligence organization on June 19th. That came just days after Israeli airstrikes killed the previous chief, Mohammad Ghazami and his deputy on June 15th.
We do a little
So,
trolling. It's called
Rapid
we do a little
replacement after
trolling.
Israeli strikes.
It demonstrates Iran's determination to maintain command and control within its absolutely critical security apparatus, even while under direct attack, under this decapitation pressure. They're showing resilience in their command structure.
So taken together, these appointments might signal a subtle but important shift. Maybe less focus on external projection, more on internal consolidation, managing potential dissent. Suggests the regime feels the heat from within, maybe as much as from Israel.
That's a very sharp observation. I think it's a strong possibility. While they're obviously still fighting externally, the leadership seems keenly aware of and actively preparing for internal instability. It's a subtle but potentially significant sign of the pressure they're really feeling.
Okay, let's zoom out now, look at the wider region, particularly Iran's network of proxies, the so-called axis of resistance. Because the threats coming from Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, for instance, are incredibly serious. They're warning of major escalation if the U.S. gets dragged deeper into this.
They are, and the threats are explicit, potentially catastrophic. Kataib Hezbollah's spokesperson, Abu Ali al-Askari, warned on June 19th. He said U.S. participation would trigger widespread attacks on U.S. bases across the region.
That's expected, maybe. But he said more, didn't he?
Much more. He threatened the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab al-Mandab Strait, and ports in the Red Sea. He also boasted Iran could keep firing missiles at Israel for a year and target the entire American presence in West Asia. This is not just posturing.
Closing those waterways. Hormuz, Bab al-Mandab. That's globally significant. Huge amounts of oil and trade pass through there.
Absolutely critical choke points. Closing them would have immediate, profound, cascading consequences for the global economy. Energy prices, supply chains. It would escalate the conflict instantly to a global scale.
And is this just rhetoric from the militias, or is there more behind it?
Well, according to U.S. officials speaking to the New York Times on June 17th, U.S. intelligence indicates Iran has prepared missiles and equipment specifically to strike U.S. bases if the U.S. joins Israel's campaign.
So intelligence backs up the threat.
It seems so. The same official said the Houthis in Yemen would almost certainly resume attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, and Iran might even lay mines in the Strait of Hormuz if the U.S. gets involved. This suggests it's not just loose talk from proxies. It looks like a coordinated, pre-planned escalation strategy across the axis of resistance.
And these groups are also reacting very strongly to the talk about targeting Khamenei.
And very strongly. That appears to be an absolute red line for them. Askari from Kataib Hezbollah, Akram al-Kabi from Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba. They both condemned Trump's recent comments about Khamenei being an easy target, even though Trump denied immediate plans.
And Kabi made specific threats.
He did. On June 19th, he explicitly threatened to target U.S. citizens, soldiers, diplomats, and any direct or indirect interest if Israel or the U.S. actually targets Khamenei. Another group, Suraya al-Dam, made similar unspecified threats if the conflict continues.
So the message is clear. Targeting Khamenei personally triggers massive retaliation against U.S. interests, regardless of direct U.S. involvement in that specific act.
That seems to be the message. They see the U.S. as complicit, as enabling Israel. So any attack on the supreme leader would likely unleash the entire axis against U.S. targets across the board. It's a critical threshold.
What about airspace issues? The Houthis and Iraqi militias are making demands there too?
Yes, adding another layer of potential friction. The Houthi leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, vowed on June 19th to keep attacking Israel, but also called on Arab countries, specifically including Iraq, to prevent Israel from using their airspace to fly towards Iran.
And the Iraqi militias echoed that.
They did. Ali al-Asadi from Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba's political bureau called on the Iraqi government to declare Iraqi airspace a no-fly zone for the U.S. and Israel, and even to target any Israeli planes or missiles entering it.
That would make Iraqi airspace a contested zone.
Absolutely, and it helps explain why these Iran-backed militias in Iraq have been trying to get their hands on air defense systems for years. They want the capability to actually enforce such a no-fly zone, which would totally change regional flight dynamics and power projection.
Finally, how is Israel's air campaign impacting Iran's ability to actually supply these proxies, like Hezbollah in Lebanon? Are the strikes degrading that crucial supply chain?
That seems to be a key secondary objective, and yes, it appears to be having an effect. Israel struck a site in Vandar, which is in Ghazban province, on June 18th. This specific site was reportedly used by Iran to produce anti-tank guided missiles, ATGMs.
Missiles specifically for Hezbollah and other groups.
Exactly. For Lebanese Hezbollah and other axis of resistance groups, the IDF announced the strike but didn't initially say where it was, highlighting the sensitivity. But hitting a production facility like that directly impacts the material support flowing from Iran to its proxies.
So it weakens them indirectly.
It aims to degrade their capabilities, their ability to rearm and sustain operations. So, yes, the Israeli air campaign likely has this significant secondary effect of weakening the proxy groups that rely so heavily on Iran for weapons and money.
Even though Hezbollah's leadership has publicly reaffirmed support for Iran?
Yes. Hezbollah's Secretary General, Naim Qassem, confirmed their unwavering support for Iran in this war. The political alignment remains strong. But targeting these supply lines, the production facilities, that's bound to challenge their operational capacity over the long term. It hits their material strength. #,
So, after all that, what does it all mean? We've covered a huge amount of ground here. This whirlwind of activity, the diplomatic moves, the threats, the intense military back and forth, the shifts inside Iran. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. But if we try to connect all those threads, step back and see the bigger picture, it seems clear that despite some talk about negotiation, neither side has really softened its core demands, has it?
Doesn't look like it.
No. Israel is pushing ahead with this really aggressive campaign, trying to degrade Iran's nuclear potential, cripple its military, and now, remarkably, openly targeting its leadership. Iran is hitting back with more sophisticated missiles, showing resilience. But they're also clearly reorganizing internally, appointing hardliners focused on domestic security. That signals real concern about their own stability, perhaps fueled by those energy strikes and the broader pressure.
And the regional proxies are just waiting in the wings.
Poised to dramatically escalate if the U.S. steps in fully, threatening global choke points, U.S. bases. It paints a picture of a really volatile, multi-front scenario with potentially global consequences.
You can really see how incredibly complex and interconnected all these events are. It's definitely not just about one missile launch or one airstrike, is it? It's this deep strategic dance with unbelievably high stakes.
Every move matters, on the battlefield, in diplomacy, even internal appointments. It all has ripple effects across the region and honestly far beyond.
Which leads to maybe a final unsettling thought.
Yeah. As these lines keep blurring between military action, political maneuvering, internal stability concerns, where does that threshold for irreversible escalation actually lie? The point of no return.
And what role could mistakes play? Unintended consequences, miscalculations in deciding where this all goes.
Exactly. What role might those unintended consequences play in charting the future course of this already incredibly dangerous conflict?
That is definitely something for all of us to ponder as this continues to unfold. We really hope this exploration today has given you a clearer, more informed perspective on what's happening. Thank you for joining us.